Woo, the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R radio star. Here, boy, we're kicking off July, but we're going to kick it off right, because what I'm about to share with you, for patrons only, I mean, it might pop up elsewhere, you know, on other people's feeds, but as far as for Sovryn Tech, this is where it's going to show up. Stephanie, of course, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, the boss, did a couple things at PorcFest. I guess now is almost 2 weeks ago. This was, I think this was done on the 21st, on June 21st, 2018. And she had a voiceover talk that day, and then she was on what is effectively a Women in Liberty panel, okay? Or some people will jest, and you probably heard me mention on the Sovryn Tech episode from PorcFest, kind of a vaginas and whatever, you know, panel. These happen at conferences all the time, and it's like, oh, what the fuck, you know? Can't you just let women just talk as people, you know? And well, anyway, that whole subject gets discussed here, and I certainly am no expert in it, and you might as well let the ladies, you know, lay down their own concerns on this. So, but this was a fantastic panel. It was moderated by Kat Murdy, who I am a bit of a fan of. And Paige Peterson, of course, is on there. Sovryn Tech alumni right there. Paige Peterson is on the panel, as well as another gal who is more of the political scene with the Libertarian Party, but you'll get introductions of everybody. And, of course, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy is there. Now, per usual, Stephanie, like, as you listen to this, I mean, of course, she's the best. So, and Ellen and I, you know, we were there. It was in this, you know, tent, because PorcFest, everything's outside, and we were in this tent, and you know, we were there both catching the talk, and like half the time, Ellen and I were just like fist pumping. We're like, yeah, you know, every time Stephanie would start talking, she would just kill it. It was so great, and we're just like laughing. I mean, you know, because Stephanie just wherever she shows up, I mean, she just dominates. You know, whatever is going on. I mean, she just takes it right over. In fact, you can see at points, in my opinion, and this is no offense to Kat Murdy, but where Stephanie really like almost takes on the leadership role of the panel. It was. I mean, that's just her. You know, it's what she does. She's the boss. You know, she takes over wherever she goes, and I fucking love it. So we enjoyed watching it. I had a great time attending it. There is the Q&A at the end where you'll hear some interesting questions. There was certainly, you know, from my perspective, so Ellen and I were like way in the back of the tent, and we're just like kind of, you know, watching everybody else, and there were a lot of people cringing a bit, you know, at some of the things that were being said. And can you imagine perhaps what gender, not that I want to assume gender, but can you imagine what gender those people were? Yeah, a lot of guys starting to, you know, they're getting a little uncomfortable with everything that was being said, which I think, well, I guess, you know, again, this panel didn't necessarily need to exist, but then maybe it shows why it existed, because there really is a problem. And all of those problems of, you know, why aren't there more women in liberty? All these things, you know, age-old questions that have been going back and forth get addressed by, you know, by women that have something to say about it and that have experience in the matter, etc. So I want to present this to you, and you know, of course, I have Stephanie's permission, and she was more than happy to have this out there. Her audio collection efforts were much better than mine throughout PorcFest. So because I still have my talk that I want to release to you, but I'm just holding on the audio or on the video/audio. For that, which I got an independent copy done. I just haven't received it yet, so no big deal, and no rush on that either, of course. Also, Stephanie did a panel, or not a panel, she did a talk on how to become a voiceover, voice artist and everything. I will be releasing that soon as well in the Patreon feed, but this is certainly the hot stuff. This is the one where I think, you know, people will be like, oh, wow, yeah, I really wish I was there to hear that. I want to hear that. And when you have, you know, just brilliant people on that panel, why wouldn't you want to hear it? So no need for me to talk a whole lot about this. I don't need to share my opinions. I'll let the ladies do all the talking, as I am wont to do, to let them do all the talking and let them, you know, handle the business, because they're the best. So and Stephanie, brilliant. Dude, trust me, you're gonna love it. You're probably gonna pump your fist a couple times and be like, yeah, you know, just like Ellen and I were. So anyway, there were other women in attendance too, and I think that like that was the general gist, is that they were generally smiling. It looked like a lot of the guys were not very pleased with what they were hearing. So, and I don't know how well that speaks to, just real quick. I mean, I'm curious what the overall response, put it this way. The gist that I'm getting from a lot of people that I've talked to that went to PorcFest is that they felt the PorcFest was a little lukewarm. Now, I don't know if it's because there were moments that where, some very not so kind to the Libertarian Party line were being laid out there, and people weren't comfortable with that. I mean, I don't know what was going on. But I also want to get out a thank you to Roger Paxton for, again, being really great with Stephanie and I, giving us plenty of talks to do. And Rachel Goldsmith actually set up this talk, and, for what it is, I mean, I'm glad that the stuff, certainly that Stephanie got to say the things she had to say, and that the other ladies as well, got their opportunity. So, I'm not necessarily complaining about that. But anyway, check it out. Give it a listen. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, and maybe it'll give you some food for thought. And, how could you not want to listen to Stephanie for like the next however long this goes? It's like about an hour. Come on. Of course you're going to, because she's amazing. So, all right, there it is. Woo! Here we'll set your Wayback Machine for June 21st, 2018, and it's the Women in Liberty panel is what it was called, and good times. I'm going to let the music, or I'll let the talk just end, and let the applause ride it out. So I won't be coming back at the end of this. So I will see all of you on the other side.
Yeah, so thank y'all for coming to yet another Women in the Liberty Movement conversation. We have one of these at every PorcFest, every other conversation. There's always one. We're going to talk about that a little bit and talk about what it might be like to be a woman in the liberty movement, whether or not we're underrepresented, and some of the issues there. So we have an all-star panel today, so I'm going to let all of them introduce themselves. But first, I'm Kat Worthy. You can find me on Twitter as @KatWorthy. I'm the co-founder of Feminists for Liberty. I'm also the comms director and on the leadership committee for the Ladies of Liberty Alliance. And I sit on the boards of Students for Sensible Drug Policy and the White Coat Waste Project. I also run the digital strategy for the Cato Institute, and I help out with the Free State Project social media, and I'm a young voice. So I'm a little involved in the liberty movement, and all of these ladies right here are at least as busy. So with that, Jess.
Hey everyone, my name is Jess Mears. I am the development manager for the Libertarian Party. That's my day job for the National Party. And in my spare time, I do political campaigns. So I just managed a campaign for a woman that's 30 years old named Allison in a special election down in Florida where I live. And I was also on the Johnson Weld campaign. I did the advance for the rallies and events for the Johnson Weld campaign. And I've been a libertarian activist for about 10 years, and so the experience that I bring to the table is really party building, organizing, and political campaigns.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Murphy. I am... what am I? It's hard to know where to start because the other ladies on the panel have a lot of official experience doing activism with organizations. I'm a little bit more free and loose. I moved to New Hampshire in 2006 for the Free State Project, so that would be almost 12 years ago at this point. And pretty soon after that, I stopped doing any kind of political activism because I realized it wasn't for me and I didn't feel like progress was being made. And so I kind of just started doing my own thing, which included starting a talk show about libertarianism as it applies to personal relationships and reclaiming freedom in more of a personal sense. And that's been a theme in everything that I've done, I guess, since then. I changed careers and I became a voice actor from a career as a scientist. So I'm Dr. Stephanie Murphy, but I don't work in science anymore. Part of personal freedom for me was, creating my own business and entrepreneurship. So I think that counts on the resume a little bit. And now I'm just rambling, so I'm going to pass it to Paige.
Hi, Hi, my name is Paige. I am also a member of the Free State Project as of a couple of years ago. And I work more in the technology field. My first PorcFest actually was 5 years ago, where I convinced my then employer's Open Garden to pay for me to come out here and do some outreach to the libertarian community, because we were making mesh networking technology, which I thought would be interesting to this community, and indeed it was. And there's actually a pretty strong mesh networking community in New Hampshire. So it's good to kind of see that thriving. I think there's a network kind of being built up in Manchester. But nowadays, I kind of got, after that, or during that time period, I got consumed in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I was living in San Francisco at the time, so I started helping organize the San Francisco Bitcoin meetup, so I got to meet a lot of interesting Bitcoin cryptocurrency people, because most of the startups, in the early days at least, were based out there, or at least going through San Francisco. And switched jobs a couple times and landed at Zcash Company right now. And so I do community outreach for them. I also, from time to time, organize crypto parties in southern New Hampshire. So teaching people how to just use kind of internet security tools. And indeed, I'm hosting one here on Saturday at 4, I think. So after the photo. At all Expo tent, I believe. So yeah, I'm all over as well. But yeah, mostly around community organizing, things like that.
So we obviously, as I said, have a really cool panel, a lot of different expertise, and hopefully we'll have time for questions and a lot of discussion. We're not recording this outside of
I'm recording it. I was going to say, Stephanie's I don't know how good the quality is going to be.
We don't have video or anything, so I wouldn't be doing my job as a digital person if I didn't tell you. If you do tweet or you share on whatever it is you're active on, it's always good at this and everything else you see going on at PorcFest. Please share it. #PorcFest or #PorcFestXB. And let's get the message out to everybody who couldn't be here today. And on that note, what do we think about this being yet another Ladies in the Liberty Movement panel? As I said, we have one at every conference. It's always kind of a joke that we laugh about, oh, look, we're on another ladies panel.
What was the description for this?
I think it is actually, it's another ladies panel.
Or find out why these ladies don't want to be on yet another.
But yeah.
I don't know. I guess my perspective is I've never been on a ladies liberty panel, but I've been on several kind of women-focused tech panels where they varied from like more or less interesting, like talking about the work that we're doing, versus the less interesting talking about like what it's like to be a woman in tech. Which I don't find as compelling as a topic, I guess.
We're going to talk about both.
Because I would prefer to talk about like the things that I'm working on and like the things that might be interesting to the people at the conference. I think if you're at a technology conference, it's more interesting to talk about the technology than your gender.
Well, yeah, and it sort of sends a message, too, that there needs to be, like, a specific thing for the women, as opposed to being just like, and women are here because of course.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be talked about because, women do have different experiences when they're in environments, when they're underrepresented, and perhaps the people who need to hear it don't always listen. But I do think it is good to like amplify our voices because, I don't know, I've definitely experienced things that made me feel like excluded, left out, like I don't belong in certain situations that are male-dominated. Feel singled out, that's part of the whole panel thing. It's like, there's not as many women here as there are other genders. Why don't we just like put them out on display to say like, look, we don't have a problem with this.
Look, there's some women
There's 4 women here. Everybody look. sometimes it feels a bit like that with women in crypto, especially. I've had that experience too. And I think it's good to just like acknowledge it and talk about it. Sure, why not, right? I had mixed feelings about being on this panel a little bit because I feel like, we get asked to be on these panels. Often it's a volunteer thing, right? And it's like, okay, we're going to talk about how there's not that many women here and what else. And we get asked to give the female perspective on things as though there is one female perspective, as though we're like a hive mind and we speak, the four of us up here speak for all women out there.
We
and
definitely don't disagree on anything.
Yeah, right. Like, of course women have different opinions. They're people. And that's the whole point. Like, women are people and they just want to be treated like normal and not like a weird alien that like landed at PorcFest and and you have to ask them about like, well, what is the alien perspective on this, So yeah, I think I can understand what you're saying, Paige, about how like you probably just want to be treated like anyone else too, right? And I do too. I guess maybe people have different perspectives on whether talking about it is beneficial to getting there or not. But I think it is. So, I mean, that's why I agreed to be on the panel.
I guess I see it as like a sort of a feedback where the people that are interested in the topic are going to go to that panel or whatever, but you're not necessarily interested in reaching out to those people per se. If you're actually trying to like promote more equal gender or whatever your agenda may be, but yeah.
I don't know, I think all of what y'all are saying rings true to me. I kind of go back and forth on these kinds of things. Ladies Liberty Alliance, which I'm involved in, is solely for women in the liberty movement, which is kind of what got me thinking maybe it makes sense to have these sometimes, because I've always hated the idea of sex segregation of any kind. And then I started Nina Whitfield now. When she started it, she kept trying to get me to come out and get involved. I was like, I don't know, Nina, this not really me. She's like, no, I need you, I need help, come on, let's go. And they started doing it, and I know so many more libertarian women now, one, but two, we talk about issues and topics that don't come up otherwise. And maybe that's a problem, but maybe those kind of spaces create that discussion. So at least that's what I'm hoping will happen here today, so we'll see. But yeah, do you think that being a woman meaningfully has impacted or does impact your experiences with the liberty movement?
Jess didn't get a chance to respond to that last question. Did you want to say anything, Jess?
Yeah, so like about being asked to be on a panel for women, my first impressions were like, sure, I'll do that, but I thought, what will be the outcome of such a panel? I always like to have goals in mind with what I'm doing. And so it's just kind of I've been thinking about it for a couple months now since asked, and like, what is going to be the outcome of a panel of women? Like, I'm pretty happy in the liberty movement. There's not a lot that a women's panel that we can discuss to figure out what to do to change women in the movement. And so I'm kind of intrigued to find out what's going to be the end result of our discussion.
But do y'all think that being a woman has impacted your experiences with the liberty movement at all, or do you think that it's sort of neutral?
Oh, absolutely. It has impacted my experiences in the liberty movement. Yeah, I mean, I realized over time that freedom is, to me at least, more personal than political. And so, of course, my gender plays into that, First of all, the very concept of gender, right? When you're born, they say it's a boy or it's a girl. And from that moment, you're treated very differently by your parents, by society, by people, just because of what that doctor said. And maybe you don't feel like a boy or a girl. Maybe you're born with ambiguous genitalia or something like that. Or maybe you just don't feel like those labels fit. Or you think, why should I be treated a certain way based on what this doctor said when I was born? Or based on the configuration of my anatomy?
Treated in some cases have laws treat you differently as well, not just people.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, even if there weren't laws involved, I do still think it is a libertarian issue, because if we question that very assumption of like, why should I be treated differently just because of a doctor saying it's a boy or it's a girl when I was born? I mean, it really starts to get into the personal aspects of freedom, right? Shouldn't we have the right to sort of self-determination? Shouldn't we have like the opportunity to do to just be treated as a regular person, essentially? And I think we should. But of course, like if we have certain anatomy, the anatomy that we call female, then we do start to get laws that affect us. We have laws that affect going into gendered spaces, like bathrooms and locker rooms. We have laws about reproduction, birth control, and abortion that affect us if we have the anatomy to be affected by it. And so, yeah, of course it affects my experience of libertarianism, the body that I was born in, the ways that I've been treated as a result. You know, the way I think of myself. Sexual harassment, too, is another thing that I really think is a forgotten libertarian issue, right? You should, part of feeling free is like being able to walk down the street without being worried that you're going to get dragged off into a corner and assaulted or something like that. Or just to do your thing without kind of being bothered just because you look a certain way or whatever. And I don't see libertarians pay a lot of attention to that often. I mean, I see libertarians a lot of times glom onto men's issues, divorce proceedings, and fathers don't get custody of children and things like that. Saying that there is no pay gap, various other like issues associated with like the men's rights movement. But I don't hear libertarians a lot talking about issues that affect me, you know, as a woman, like sexual harassment and freedom from violence against women.
Definitely. I mean, from our perspective at Feminists for Liberty, we talk about all of those issues. We talk about all of those issues, and we don't consider any of them men's issues or women's issues. Anyone else's issues are not. They certainly impact certain gender groups more or less, but they're all things that really impact all of us and just freedom as a whole.
But have you encountered this as Feminists for Liberty representative? Like, libertarians are afraid to call themselves a feminist.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's like the F word.
Right.
It's feminist.
I mean, there's something I personally find very interesting about the fact that so many people who identify as libertarian feel perfectly fine going to the whole like feminism is cancer movement, etc., and saying like no, all fights for women's rights or anything like that is anti-liberty. You can't talk about sex discrimination or gender discrimination because that's socialism.
Except against men. You can talk about it against men, but not against women.
And that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
What do y'all think? Do you think that being a woman has impacted your feelings in the space at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I came into the party when I was 18 years old and registered to vote and was like, I need to find a political party to call my home, and Libertarian matched up with it. And I've been given a lot of really great opportunities, and I think it's when there's such high demand, you find an 18-year-old young woman in a local Libertarian party is just gonna like come say, we want to keep you forever. So I've been given some special opportunities in my career, received scholarships to campaign trainings and things that have kind of shaped my life as an activist. And I would definitely attribute that to not only being a female, but also a young female. So it has shaped my kind of like journey as a libertarian that maybe a man would not have had some of those opportunities.
True. Would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of correlates a lot with the jobs that I take on as well. It's like doing a lot of community outreach roles where those roles tend to be more female oriented. So I guess in that sense, because I am in those roles, I have been given opportunities to like come to events like this for my job or meet other people. But I kind of agree with Stephanie in that like it's just because I'm a woman, like that's shaped my entire life. So therefore, yes, of course, it's shaped my involvement in this community as well.
I think Stephanie is onto something too, is the fact that I think both Stephanie and Jess did a good job of showing both pros and cons, because I do think that you get certain opportunities and people want you there. Even if they want you as a token, they want you to say, yes, we have women like us too. But I mean, you also get, I can't tell you how many people will come up and say, like, you can't be a libertarian, it's not for women. I mean, there was that whole issue at the Out Conference a couple of years ago where one of their outreach coordinators said that women shouldn't be involved in the movement, that their only job is supporting men activists, and they're taking men's jobs, and it's not okay.
Never heard of anything like that.
Never once, right?
No, I've heard they're taking our jobs, but not about women.
Well, it happens. So yeah, I think that's actually good.
That's a weird person.
Yes. I was not a fan of that argument, no. But yeah, so I think that what you were talking about, Paige, kind of is true too. Because every time I hear there aren't women in the liberty movement, I think, what are you talking about?
Look at all the children around. Like, there's a lot of children here. They came for women.
Someone's having them. But it's not just as parents. I mean, just people I work with on a day-to-day basis. Most of the people that I work with in the Liberty Movement, I work with a lot of different organizations, are women. And it's so many women. But they're all women doing usually roles like marketing and media and outreach and publications and fundraising and development and where.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's like?
Right, yeah. So I mean, like, is that a problem? Is that like a visibility thing? Is it, why do I think I can tell you why I picked my own job. I work in digital, and part of the reason I did it was, one, I think it's fun, and this is what I was doing anyway, but two, I wanted something that would be flexible for if I wanted to have children and I could take care of kids and still work full time. And I think that that's getting easier to do, which is why we're starting to see more female scholars. But I mean, yeah, there's a big age gap, and also, yeah. So I was kind of wondering, like, what do y'all think? Do you think that there aren't enough women in the liberty movement? What do you think of the fact that, like, I personally think that women who aren't in the on-TV roles tend to get erased. I don't know. I kind of want to hear your thoughts.
I would love to answer this question, if you don't mind. So I do social media as one of the many hats I wear for the Libertarian Party. And the statistics for the National Party on our Instagram, on our Twitter, and on our Facebook is pretty consistent across the board. 25% of our followers are female. And so that's our demographic of people that are paying attention to us. So when you look at the people that are involved, and it's maybe a fourth women or more, I'd say we're actually pretty represented from the people who say, I'm interested in libertarianism. And Carla Howe was the executive director of the Libertarian Party before the current one is West Benedict. So the Libertarian Party itself has had female representation at the executive director level. I would love to see more of the think tanks, though, having female leaders, because I don't think there's too many of them that have executive director kind of titles in these think tanks. The Free State Project is the chair or president is Rachel. She's a mom and a woman, and she's in charge of the Free State Project. So I do think women are pretty well represented.
But maybe not in some of the higher positions.
Not always in some of the top positions.
I kind of want to push back on your social media statistic, because 25% is not that much when you think about the fact that women are 52% of the population.
Correct.
But I mean, I run a lot of social media pages too, and I can tell you that, like, there's certainly on the demographic side, it seems like things have changed a lot where, and it might be topical, when I was doing more stuff around economics, it was like 83% old men. Mm-hmm. But some of the accounts, especially on things like Instagram, we have way more women than men on for some of the organizations I work with, and I think that, like, that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, if I might jump in, I mean, I think that those Instagram stats tell a story, because clearly there are women who are interested in this stuff. Mm-hmm. It's just, why don't they always show up to events, and why don't they always get recognized or end up in positions where they're visible? And that's a complicated question. One of it, I think, is like the problem that any kind of workplace situation has, which is like, there are cultural expectations on women to do the lion's share of housework and the lion's share of childcare and the lion's share of elder care with caring for their parents. There are lots of studies that back this up. There's this whole idea of the second shift.
Including in a heterosexual relationship where both partners work an equal amount of time and earn the same amount.
Yeah, absolutely. The second shift, the whole idea of the second shift is when a woman gets home after working just as her male partner does every day, a full-time job, and then she is expected to be the one who does most of the household work to keep the house running. And with elders that need care, when they have different sex children, it is the female children where the burden falls disproportionately on them to take care of the aging parent or whatever. And, there's lots of reasons for that. Cultural expectations are complicated and hard to change, I suppose. But, if you've been raised your entire life to sort of just accept that it's your job to do all this work, you have less free time to get involved in things like a liberty movement. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's why.
How do we address that? Is that something, of course we can work on changing the culture, but is there something that we do within the movement?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked about that, because I think that's the next point. So you have these time burdens, and there's like limited time to get involved in sort of extracurricular activities, especially if you're a parent, and especially if you're like the main caregiver for a child. But then sometimes, some women have an experience where they show up to an event, like a libertarian event or something like that, and they feel like they look around and they don't see a lot of other women, and they're like, I wonder why that is. Maybe even in the back of their mind, not consciously, but they're like, is this like not for me? Is this like, do I not belong here? And then, they might have other experiences where they get asked questions, or like perhaps like hit on inappropriately, or just made to feel uncomfortable in some way. And culturally, I think the way that a lot of women deal with feeling uncomfortable is they just leave. They don't like announce why they're leaving. They don't like, make a big deal out of it. They just take off and disappear. And then it's like a retention problem, I think, at least partially. So those two things combine, the time pressure, and then also the feeling that you get as a woman sometimes at an event like this of, maybe this isn't the supportive environment for me, or maybe this isn't exactly for me. And other women have come in before because they're interested in this stuff, like you said, but then they, for whatever reason, they leave. That's what I think is going on.
Those are all really solid points. I can tell you within Ladies Liberty Alliance, we made a decision a while ago. We try to tell people, like, bring your kids. Because you're right. So many people keep saying, like, I really want to come. My husband won't watch the kids. Which, that's a huge problem. But that's not what we're trying to fix right now. Like, okay, that's great. That's your marriage.
Like, if only you could fix it single-handedly,
exactly.
Right? Like, you can't.
Us right now, right before you can come to this meeting, let's sit down and figure out this massive societal problem. Probably no, right? So we keep telling folks, like, bring your kids. Your kids are welcome. And there's still this feeling a lot of people have where they're like, I'm so sorry, I had to bring my baby. It's fine. It's not a problem. I think that's one of the nice things about PorcFest. You see all these kids running around, and you see a lot more families, and you see a lot more people who don't have to decide, like, who has to stay home.
That's been a concerted effort. Like, I think this is my 10th PorcFest or something like that. It's been a concerted effort to make it more family-friendly over the years. So, I think that's a plus.
In my county affiliate, in my hometown, there's a gentleman that's a single dad, and he had to apologize profusely about bringing his kids, which were perfectly well behaved. Mm-hmm. So it's not even just a female issue too; it's also single fathers.
Definitely. Yeah, if we want to make these more inclusive spaces. But did you have any thoughts on this?
I definitely see the lack of, family friendliness in a lot of the situations. I guess my experience goes back to like technology conferences and things like that, where it is a very similar demographic. So there are not that many that offer child care or anything like that, so that could definitely be a burden or a big reason why. And I've learned from a good friend who hosts Bitcoin meetups in Chicago, actually, that's one of the things that she does is like offer, kind of do more family-friendly, like weekend events, things like that, that just make it more open for anyone to join. So,
yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, so how do we feel about so-called women's issues? We sort of touched upon this earlier, but this idea that there are a set of issues that impact women that should be called women's issues. We silo them and we talk about them. How do we feel about the fact that they're siloed, and do we think that libertarians are doing enough to talk about women's issues or men's issues or anything in here?
Yeah, I think that they're siloed, and it shows what the sort of dominant perspective is when things that primarily affect men are not called men's issues, but certain other things that affect like the other half of the population are specifically called women's issues, and even like discouraged to be talked about in some cases.
Yeah, a lot of people get really upset when you start bringing up stuff that it doesn't predominantly impact men.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so that just shows that in our culture, the dominant perspective is a male one. The male perspective is considered just a perspective, and a woman's perspective is considered a woman's perspective. It's an outsider. It's not the main issue. It's not the main thing. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's telling, and once you start realizing that, you see it all over the place. You know, it's not just in libertarianism. Of course, it's in the entire culture. So how do we feel about the fact that they're siloed off? I mean, I don't know. I would like people to care about issues that affect women just as much as they care about issues that affect men or all people or other genders or whatever. But is sort of drawing attention to them and amplifying them being talked about a little bit, is that a way to make them into just issues instead of women's issues? I don't know. Maybe.
I really like the point that you made, too, about perspective, and a man's perspective just being a perspective, and a woman's perspective being a woman's perspective. I think it's really interesting to bring it back to social media and how, like, you can... I love this stuff because I can see the data on who likes what, and I love that. And I went to this meeting with Facebook a while back where they were talking about about representation. They're like, kind of breaking down the numbers on videos, and people respond to videos with people who look like them in it. They'll watch for longer. But what's really interesting is there's a big break here, because white men really don't like to watch videos without white men in it. People of color and women will watch those videos. They're much more likely to watch a video with someone who's of the same demographics as they are. But they still watch those videos. White men will see videos that feature people who aren't white men, and they click off because they immediately say, oh, this is not for me, this is for one of those other groups.
And it's interesting because if you're not a white man, a lot of times you'll see a video and you won't see someone that looks like you, but that's just kind of normal, right? You wouldn't think of clicking off of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's why, like, the whole idea...
You never see those videos with someone who looks like you, so it's not the normal thing, right?
Right, exactly. And I think that gets into the whole idea of whitewashing in movies, right? Where characters that aren't white are portrayed by white actors so that white people will watch the movie, right? And that's really interesting that you brought up that statistic.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Does anyone know?
So like, how do we get people to care about people that don't look like them? That's kind of depressing. I don't know.
I don't know. Tribalism seems like a big problem. It seems like a growing problem to me. Something I'm worried about.
Isn't it just a biological thing, though? Where people are just more attracted to people that look like them?
That's true. It is, but it's still a question of why then there's this discrepancy between sex and race, right? Because then we would expect to see the same numbers for everybody.
Well, if there are more videos with white men in them, period, then it's probably easier for white men to
watch something that looks like them.
Yeah. So,
is that something we should care about? Should we be trying to create more liberty or content with people who look like all of us? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that I guess when I was growing up, and, I pass as white, so I'm not, yeah. When I was growing up, like, I guess I wished I saw some more characters that represented, me, or that looked more like me. And I know that there are lots of people who feel that way, right? Like they didn't have many TV shows to watch or books to read where they could really identify with the characters, where the character was queer or something else, or, a person of color or whatever, or is a hero. That was one of those things.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I'm pretty sure the only Indian on TV was Apu from The Simpsons.
Right, and that's a very stereotypical representation of an Indian person. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it helps if you want to attract all different kinds of people to show the faces of all different kinds of people and the voices of all different kinds of people.
So you talked about creating more content that features different people. With the Libertarian Party, we have a small staff, and we all work very hard, and nobody's really willing to put in the effort to putting themselves out there online. So I've had a unique opportunity as a young woman I bought a video camera, and I'm now creating content for the Libertarian Party just because I took initiative to do it, because we don't really have a whole lot of digital content. So I'm marketing myself as a libertarian and taking advantage of the special opportunity I have because nobody else is doing it. So I think maybe women could maybe empower themselves a little bit to create their own content, or even just not be.
There is a lot of women-led content out there.
Yeah. And not be afraid to put yourself out there online, whether it's like Facebook live streaming or working with an organization saying like, I will speak on behalf for you. So we gotta kind of empower each other, and I think women can say like, hey, you're really good at this, I think you should have this opportunity to do that. And helping each other and facilitating, kind of maybe even just encouraging them more to be a little less self-conscious about being out as a liberty movement person.
I mean, I love that idea. I think it's great. But I also think it's true that there are just so many libertarian women who are out there, who are on YouTube, who are on Twitter, who are on Facebook, that are building their own brand, and they're doing so much to spread the word of liberty. But what's interesting is that most of them are doing this sort of in their free time or on their own, that kind of thing. Whereas you don't see that they're not the ones who are out there for an organization with this staff of all these women who are working as publicists and video editors and all of that behind them pushing this, right? So I think that there's still that kind of gap.
Yeah. Also, Jez, I just want to push back on that a little bit. There are a lot of women who create content, but there is an attrition rate because some of them disappear because of harassment that they get when they put themselves out there.
Right.
And it's nice to say just put yourself out there and have the confidence to do it, but sometimes you get really negative feedback or you get harassment, and then you just don't feel like putting yourself out there anymore.
You get death threats. I think that's like, you can get people mailing you stuff or coming to your house and things like that, and I think that that's a big thing that turns people off.
Absolutely.
I've been waiting for one of those.
That's how you know you've made it big.
Okay.
So we had an audience question or comment. I just wanted to give her a chance to speak.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Did you want to say something? Do you want to come up to the microphone, or? Okay, sorry.
We'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. I wanted to keep space at the end anyway.
Okay,
get some questions. But yeah, so let's talk the Me Too movement. How do we, as libertarians, address this? Is this something that libertarianism as a whole needs to address? Is this a problem in the liberty movement? What is the approach, and how do we feel about the ways in which, and there's been very different responses from all sorts of libertarians, famous libertarians. How do you kind of feel about some of that?
I'll take it first if nobody else wants to go first. I love the Me Too movement. I think it's great that women are finally pushing back against some of the things that have been considered so normal in our culture. Like it was normal to just get called into the boss's office and, have him say some comment about, hey, sweetie, you're looking good today, or something like that. Or worse, especially on the set of movies and in media and stuff like that. I've read a lot of the stories that have come out. But a big question, even in the broader culture, is like, what do we do with men who do things like Louis C.K. did and pull out his dick in the middle of a hotel room when it's supposed to be like, a professional environment? and it's a hard question. I think libertarianism, as sort of a movement that's outside of the mainstream, it attracts people who think outside the box, but it also attracts people who are on the fringe, and for like a good reason, because they're creeps and they don't fit in elsewhere. And I think that libertarians could stand to maybe look at themselves a little bit critically and say, are we actually doing all we can to like keep those people out of our community who do things like harass women and make questionable consent decisions, and do things like sexual harassment and even rape? Are we doing enough to keep those people out of our community? Because letting them in excludes a bunch of other people that you might want in the community, right? Every time a weirdo is at a conference harassing people, there are 10 women who see that and say, yeah, I don't think I want to come back to this conference, And so what is the opportunity cost? Think about it like Frederick Bastiat, the broken window fallacy, or the theory. You can think about it in economic terms if you want, but there is a cost to being kind of too accepting, I guess, as a community. And
it's also just sticking to our values as libertarians. I always say libertarianism is about consent culture. It's about consent applied to everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that doesn't get highlighted enough, is that, consent is a foundation of the non-aggression principle. Don't initiate force or fraud on somebody else. And sexual harassment, that is initiating force on somebody.
Right, exactly. And I think, to kind of bring it back to something you were saying earlier, Stephanie, I think that we get, from the liberty movement, we get a lot of discussion of when, we're kind of at this place in our society where the ideas of consent, what is consent, etc., the value of consent is changing a lot. And so there's a lot of discussion, but I think that we get a little bit more time, we get a little bit more official standing to talk about when this idea of consent might go too far, rather than talking ever about when it hasn't gone far enough.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And there's some strange ideas floating around about consent. Like, some people think of consent as a picture rather than a movie, right? Like, if you find out new information, if you consent to something, right, like a conversation even, a sexual encounter, or even something as simple as a conversation, but then you find out some new information in real time, you can take away your consent.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what I think about a lot, because I hear a lot of libertarians come up with this idea of, like, we like contracts, right? Contracts are great. They're like, for sex and things like that. Let's sign a contract. Let's have a clear, you can do this, this, and this. But what happens when halfway through you're like, oh, I don't really want to do anything anymore. I'd like to stop now. So a lot of people say, well, no, you signed the contract.
And it's already on the blockchain, so you can't take it back. It's immutable forever.
So it's clearly not consent at that point, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it should be foundational. Like, no argument from me. I think consent is like a really important part of libertarianism, and it applies to all people.
What do y'all think? Have you seen any like problematic approaches to the Me Too movement either way, like pro, con, anything like that?
I'll speak to pro. I think the Me Too movement has empowered a lot of women to identify what is sexual harassment and to speak out and say they're not comfortable with something when they realize it's sexual harassment prior to maybe before. So I think it's really empowered women, and I think it's a good thing for our society to be able to tell women, like, this is sexual harassment and it's okay to let people know that it's not okay.
True. And I know this is a women panel, but I want to make clear that it's not just women and men. So, a lot of times aggressors are women, a lot of times the aggressed are men. There's clear societal patterns, but it's a big problem across society. And people who are non-gendered or in between, I mean, there's all sorts of different...
Actually, I would push back on that a little bit, and I think anyone could be the target of harassment or consent violations, but predominantly the aggressors are actually men.
I think that's true, but I don't think that's always true.
Not always, of course, but, I think it's a little bit misleading to say that, sometimes it's women, sometimes it's men. Well, actually, it's usually men who are the people that are perpetrating the violations.
So maybe if we're talking about patterns, maybe it's worth talking about the environments that these sexual harassments take place in, the internet, cities where it happens more. I definitely experienced a lot more harassment when I was walking down the street of San Francisco than I do in my small town in southern New Hampshire right now.
Yeah.
I definitely...
I lived in Oakland. It was very different than walking around D.C.
Yep. I felt my first year at PorcFest, I felt very awkward after I was like kind of sitting afar from this polyamorous group where someone was being super awkward afterwards versus like being kind of in a more family-oriented situation where there's a lot of kids around. So I think...
Well, the two aren't mutually exclusive, but yeah.
Sure. But I just wanted to bring up those patterns that I've seen in my experience as well.
So are you saying like when there's more people in one place, those things are more likely to happen?
Maybe not more people, but just like you're less familiar with the people around you. So I guess that is an indirect symptom of more people around you.
I like that you mentioned the internet as an environment where harassment takes place, because it's almost like driving in a car and people get road rage because they think they're like in a little bubble.
Yeah.
You know, you have that on the internet too. People can hide behind different stock accounts or whatever, and they feel emboldened to say things that they wouldn't say to someone's face in person, you know. So,
and I think people sometimes don't even think about the fact that they're talking to a real person. Some people clearly want to. They want to make this one person feel bad, etc. But most of the time they're just commenting and they don't think about it until they get a response back. Whoa.
And I think that's a really important thing about community and being comfortable in the community that you're in. I didn't know the people I was walking next to when I was walking down the street in San Francisco. I more or less feel like I know the people in the town that I live in now. Whether or not I know their name, I know that they live there, and
you've seen them,
yeah.
recognize them, yeah. So yeah, do we have any questions from the audience? Katrina, do you want to?
Sure. So something I've noticed since I've been going to libertarian conferences over the years, I started attending more conferences in 2013, is that it seems like the people who run the conferences default asking male speakers, especially for keynotes, and then, we do have women speakers. We have this female panel thingy, and that's where our female speakers are at. I don't know if that's just my experience, but I want to hear from y'all, what you think about that, and if you think it's a real problem at these and other sorts of conferences and events.
I'll go first. New Orleans next week is the Libertarian Party's national convention, and it's going to kick off on June 30th and on July 3rd. Our keynote speaker is Amaryllis Fox. She's done I'm not exactly sure, some intelligence work. I haven't read her bio in a little while, but she's our keynote speaker. She's got some really great things that I think she's going to bring to the table. And so, yeah, she's going to be the highlight.
LP in general has a lot more Libertarian Party female candidates now, too.
Yes, we have so many great women that are running for office that I'm really excited about. Eleanor Swanson in Montana is running for Congress. Gilletta is running here in New Hampshire for governor, and so there's a lot of amazing women that are running for office. I just managed to campaign in a special election for an amazing 30-year-old woman.
That's fantastic. Katrina, what you said kind of resonated with me, because I do think a lot of times there's this idea where they fill in all the main spots and then someone looks and they're like, we didn't get any women. We need to get some women. And so they get kind of added in last minute, and I think that that's changing. And I sort of wonder why that can be, because I think about it a lot. And, I mean, I know on the one hand, as libertarians as a whole don't like this idea of identity politics, this idea that, someone's being selected on the basis of gender, which I don't like either. Personally, I don't want to be invited to something because I want to be there because you want to hear what I have to say. But, so I think that there's this idea that we shouldn't even look at these things. So there's that, but I think there's also the fact that the libertarian or the liberty movement for a very long time was dominated by men. So even as there are more women now, they may not be the bigger names. They may not be the people that people are like, oh, you always get this person. They're not the people who are the EDs of something or that kind of thing. So I think that's maybe at play too. I don't know.
So I want to say it's not just your experience. I've had the same experience. And yeah, it really does feel like sometimes they fill in the main speaker slots and then they're like, oh yeah, we don't have any women. And yes, I agree with you, Kat, that I don't want to be hired for a job or asked to speak simply because I'm a woman. I would like people to pay attention to what I have to say. But at the same time, there are so many amazing, smart, powerful women that have really interesting things to say, but they don't get the credit for it, and they don't get valued, and they don't get taken as seriously as male speakers. And also, I think there is like a self-awareness that has to happen among conference organizers or whatever when they look at their roster and they see that they have mostly male speakers or all male speakers, and then they're like, oh, dang, we don't have any women. I guess we'll have to, find some fluff to create some women. Why? Like, when you look at your roster and you see that it really doesn't represent the demographics of the people of the world, or even of the people who are going to be coming to your event, you have to stop and think, why is that? Is that because maybe I have some kind of bias? I would wish that they would ask that question, but it seems like that question doesn't get asked enough.
I'm so glad you put it that way, because I think that's exactly what happens a lot of times. It's just people are inviting these same people over and over again. And it's not that there aren't qualified women or qualified people of various different demographics. It's just those are the people that they thought of. And I've been pushed back on a couple conferences that I've been involved in some of this stuff on, and it's just like, okay, this is great, but you just wrote this paper with this woman. Why did you only invite these other people and not her, even though you know that she's researched this exact topic, right, and you know her well? What happened, right? But I also wonder if it comes back to that point that we were talking about earlier, where there are so many women in the liberty movement, but they're not the ones who have this network of sort of like institutionalized support behind them to get them out, to get them booked, to get them there, to make sure that all of the other work that they're doing is covered for the like hour slot or whatever that they're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up work, because that I think is another issue that plays into this question, is that, so I know a lot of libertarians want to dispute the idea of a pay gap, but the reality is there is a cultural thing where women's work, quote unquote, work that is associated with women, like childcare, home activities, things like that, or even just work that women do. For example, there's lots of women that work in like cleaning jobs and support staff, and they're not, when you go to a restaurant, the woman is a line cook, not the main chef who has his name on the restaurant, right?
That's true. Women cook way more than men, but most chefs are men.
Right, exactly. And so, like, there is a cultural sort of devaluation of work that women do and work that is considered women's work. And I think that shows up in conference invitations where, male keynote speakers get offered, I've seen these contracts, they get offered tens of thousands of dollars to speak. Mm-hmm. And the women that they're sort of filling in to look like there's female speakers, they're like, yeah, could you like pay for your own plane ticket? And like, there's no fee for this, but you'll get lots of exposure, So I do think there is a devaluation of women as conference panelists and speakers as well. And it's frustrating to deal with that, right? Because, I've been asked to be on panels and stuff, but like they want me to do it as a volunteer position. And it's almost kind of offensive. It's like, you're asking me to work for free, like to promote your conference and to use my image on your website to make it look like there are women coming. Like, that's a little bit rude, like, give me some credit here.
Or when like they take pictures at conferences of the women there, just so that they can like post
some
them
women
up?
in this photo? I've heard that so many times. Oh, right now, this is the moment we need the women.
People do get really upset though when like the Libertarian Party sends out emails and we use photos from our last convention, and if it's all white men, I'm info@lp.org. I respond to those emails, and people are like, "Why are you using this picture?" It's like, Well, we took it. Yeah. That's who was sitting there.
Right,
So
exactly. So that's
what was there at that moment in time. Do we need to use photos all the time of women because we have to?
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. It's offensive if you're making these photos just so that you can say, "Oh, look, it's here." But it also the fact that you're getting this pushback because people are also wondering, like, why is that? Who is there?
Yeah, and it's not even all the time. Like, most of the time we try to use diverse photos on our marketing. There's just that one email that went out with that one picture, and then all the pushback comes in. And then
from that, yeah.
Whoa!
Do you have any more questions? Sure. Keep it short, please.
Sure. So I had a question about the assertion that you don't feel safe, walking down the street, and that obviously we have some kind of a cultural problem. I'm kind of curious as to what we could change, like what we need to change culturally. Maybe is there some policy that we need to be supporting? How would that work?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. I just want to clarify that there are some times when I do feel safe walking down the street. It's not like a constant state of fear. But I think, like, as a woman, you do always sort of have it in the back of your mind that there are people around who are, in general, bigger and stronger than you, and some of them want to have sex with you, and they don't care whether you want to have sex with them, right? And so that feels a little bit, like it makes you feel a little edgy all the time sometimes. So as far as what could we change, I don't really have any policies that I support. I mean, I think that has to be a cultural change and not like a legal change.
So not just specific to the libertarian community, but just kind of...
I think because we're going to interact with people outside of the liberty community all the time. Most of the time we interact with just normal human beings outside in the world. So I think, like, as far as what men can do, they can... Like, if they see another man doing something, call them out, or just say, like, maybe they need to be defended. Sure. If you see someone harassing someone else, you can tell them, like, hey, come on, cut the crap, stop that. Do you realize what you're doing?
And then you don't have kind of a white knight complex with.
Well, I mean, it depends on how you're doing it, what you're doing, right? I think there's a difference between, like, let's say you're hanging out with some of your friends and. I've had friends tell me, like, oh yeah, I don't really like hanging out with that guy because we go to the club and then he gets really grabby. I'm like, oh, what did you do? And they're like, oh, well, I tried to avoid him.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, but he's your friend, you're there with him, and maybe you could have said, like, hey, dude, like, don't do that. Right?
Yeah. Now, to follow up if I can, there's also kind of a reference to, we got these creeps that are, coming in, they're just not good people, they're, potentially rapists or harassing and so forth, and that maybe we need to, not be letting them be part of the community. How do you exclude the creeps? And I guess when you say community, like in what context? Like here for an event like this, or?
I'm talking about there are some people who constantly get, invited to speak at conferences even.
Okay.
Like, for example, in the Bitcoin community, there was a person who was invited to be a keynote speaker of a conference who had a video surface of him beating up his wife online, and he didn't get that keynote rescinded until there was like a huge outcry about it.
I think that's true. I think that there's a lot of people who work in the Liberty community, who've been working in the Liberty community for decades, that people know, people will tell you, particularly if you're a woman, like, don't be alone with that guy. He's had a lot of incidences, things like that.
Right, but he is still invited to be a conference speaker.
He's still getting promoted. He's still, like, I think that that's definitely a huge question mark. And I understand that people don't want to make a big public thing because they're worried that it's going to make the libertarian movement look bad.
Right.
But
well, that's another thing.
There's a big difference between that
it
and
makes it look bad when certain individuals are
right.
continued to be accepted.
Right.
And I think, like, the thing that Kat just mentioned is helpful, and it's how people deal with it by just privately, like, kind of warning your friends about certain people. But another thing we can do to help with that is to basically believe people when they say this person did this to me, and not say, oh, you're making it up, it's false rape accusations all the time happen. Yes, they do happen, but the more common thing is when actual rapes that did occur are not reported because the police don't even take it seriously and believe the victim. So we can believe people within our community when they have the courage to speak out about somebody that harassed them or whatever.
And I just want to say, this is a problem in all of society. It's not a problem specifically in the liberty movement.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Nobody knows what to do about Louis C.K. or any of these other people that were,
Harvey Weinstein, right?
Harvey Weinstein, yeah.
So I think we're a minute over, so we probably need to wrap up. But if anyone has one quick question. All right. I'm just say it.
So, Jess specific, do you have any thoughts on the departure of Alicia Dern in relation to this conversation?
As far as her wanting to be part of the United Independence Party?
As far as her dropping out of the chair race for the LP and basically putting the LP on blast and saying, oh, I'm going to the United Independence Party.
It's her prerogative. She can do what she wants. We're libertarians, right? Yeah.
All right. On that note, thank you all for coming here. If our panelists could just give like one line or two lines, what do you want people to take out of this conversation we had here today? I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Think for yourselves.
Women are people. Treat them like people.
I guess if you're a female, make it welcoming for females in the party. Some of my best friends in the whole world are libertarian women.
I guess my takeaway would be there's a lot for all of us to talk about, and I think that we can all learn from each other, and I just want to have maybe not specifically women in liberty panels, but a lot more discussions about all these topics. And thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Kat, for moderating. Give it up for Kat. And the panel.
Thank you all for being awesome panelists.